Hi, Ralph. Hi, Kitty. Hi, Daniel. Hi, David. Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Anstandig.
Aleichem shalom.
How are you?
Doing well, thanks. A
Excellent.
little purple. I don't know why. My everything has a little bit of a purple tint to it. I'm actually normally, not this purple, but
It's quite all right. We'll when you come to Shari Shemayim, we'll teach you all the fine optical devices so that you look fancy on screen. But it's as long as the Torah is clear, the colors of your shirt and your tie
there you go.
not as critical.
There you go.
Excellent. So it's 9:02 now. I'm sure we'll get a couple more people to come and join us in the next couple of moments.
Sounds good.
I do want to just introduce Rabbi Anstandig. Rabbi Anstandig is going to be joining us next year at Shari Shemayim as part of the YU Beit Midrash. He'll be the YU Avrech and Skan Rosh Beit Midrash here at Shari Shemayim and for the Kollel as well. And it's also privilege for me to be able to welcome Rabbi Anstandig in light of his current position, which is to be the JLIC Rabbi at Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan, where you've served for 3 years now. How long has it been?
3 years. It's technically it's not a JLIC. It's a Keilu jail. It's as if a JLIC position. Oh, okay. But yeah, I've been here for 3 years.
Okay, excellent. So Rabbi Anstandig is going to be speaking about the date of Shavuot. And I want to thank the sponsors for our pre-Shavuot Tikkun, Naomi Rifkin Mansell and David Mansell and family. And so they sponsor our Tikkun every year. And so it's a great privilege to be able to have this program, even in the midst of a pandemic, to be able to study Torah. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Rabbi Anstandig to please teach us some Torah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Strockler. I'm very excited to, I'm very excited to be coming to visit you, to live in Toronto in the next, we're going to be moving in August. We haven't yet found a place to live. If anyone knows, if anyone sees any, open apartments or houses, let me know. janstandig@torontotorah.com. Feel free to shoot me an email with anything there, because we're still looking. But my wife and I and our 2 children are very excited to be joining the community. And it's sort of funny that the first time that we're meeting is like this over Zoom. But I'm looking forward to us, God willing, being able to be physically together when it is safe and legal to do so, God willing soon. So I guess you can tell me what the best way to do this is. I'm going to put a link to the source sheet in the chat box right there. It's a Google Doc. You can click it there. Can I get like a quick thumbs up or thumbs down if you cannot access it? Anyone, any thumbs downs? I see a number of thumbs up. So okay, so we'll go with that. So I'm not gonna share my screen. I'm gonna trust that you can access it from that link. If at any point in time you lose it or can't find it, you can send a message to me. I guess if someone new comes onto the meeting, I don't know if they've changed this feature in Zoom, but it used to be that someone new comes, they can't see previous chats. So if someone new comes, they won't be able to see the source sheet. So if someone new shows up, everyone is empowered to copy and paste that link into the chat box so that someone everyone can follow along with where we are. So the title here, Dating Shavuot, where is the Zman of Zman Matan Toratenu? So we know the Torah lists in recent Torah readings even. We have Pesach, Shavuot, or not Shavuot, Pesach, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. All of these holidays are identified in the Torah and they're given a specific date, right? We know the 15th day of Nisan, that's Pesach, Yetziat Mitzrayim, like it's very clear. It's clear the date and it's clear what it represents. Interestingly, for Shavuot, the Torah doesn't give us a specific date. all the Torah gives us is where it is. You count X number of days, 49 days, right? 7 sets of 7. You count from Pesach, then you get to from the first day of Pesach, then you end up with Shavuot, which is going to be next week. It doesn't tell us the specific date. It also doesn't tell us anything significant about what happened then. Like, okay, well, in davening, we're going to say Shavuot is Zman Matan Toratenu. It's the time that we received the Torah, but that is entirely absent in the Torah itself. So the question that I want to pose, the question that I want to raise right now is, where is the Zman? Where is the date? Why is such a significant day in the Jewish calendar, the giving of the Torah? Why is that not mentioned in the Torah? And why is its precise date not given to us? In order to answer that question, I want to, like any good Jewish question, I want to address a completely different topic that I think is going to go back to answer this question. The question that I want to pose, let's say you have a shul, right? So in the shul, you have Reuven and Shimon. Let's say the chazan, right, the person leading davening is going to be Reuven. And Reuven and Shimon, Reuven's going to be leading. They don't get along. And Reuven, who's leading, hates Shimon. And Reuven says, well, I'm not going to have you in mind, Shimon. Or Shimon says, I don't want Reuven to daven for me because Reuven and I we're always arguing, and I don't want him to be the chazan because he's not going to have me in mind, and I'm not going to be able to daven. And so that's the scenario that happens. Like you have a situation where the leader and someone in the community don't get. I mean, this happens not so infrequently, maybe in other shows. I'm sure not in Shari Shemayim. Everyone gets along. Canadian, right? Everyone's very everyone's very kind and cordial. Imagine a situation where the leader and someone in the community don't get along. So the question is, can that situation work? Can you have a shul? Can you have a service where the chazan, the leader, hates a member of the community? How does that situation work? So I want to look. There's a responsa of the Maharil, Rabbi Yaakov ben Moshe Molin, German, 14th century, Germany, Austria. He has a tshuva as a responsa. This is responsa 97, Siman Sadi Zayin, as this particular question about someone leading. And that's source number 1. He's going to give 2 answers or 2 explanations for why the situation where you have a leader hates a member of the community, why that situation can't work. He's going to give 2 explanations for it. They're somewhat similar, they're somewhat different. And I want to start by exploring that. Can I ask someone who has this source sheet in front of them, if someone wants to read for us source number 1, which is this Maharil. Hebrew or in English, any language you want. Or French, if you can translate rapidly. I can take this first one, unless someone's about to unmute. I can take this first one, but someone's going to read the second one. So start preparing. You can start like, I don't know if this is how everyone's family is. My family, right? Like at the Pesach Seder, like everyone's just counting paragraphs to see when their times so they can like practice the paragraph. So someone can, start practicing paragraph number 2 because it's going to be coming. Okay. So number 1, shoot Maharil. So this is his question. It says, it appears to me this is a biblical matter. This is like a very significant thing. It says, I say that anyone who is appointed as a chazan, not from one unified group, the sages are displeased, meaning everyone in the community, everyone has to be like fully on board with the appointing the prayer leader, the chazan. It says, for Rabban Gamaliel taught, a chazan, I just lost it. There we are. Chazan fulfills the congregation's obligations to pray. Right? You have a chazan. The chazan is going to be saying brachot. This chazan is going to be davening. It's going to be motzi et harabim. The language uses motzi et harabim yedei chovatan. He's going to discharge the community's responsibility, obligation. Keshem shemotzi et she'eno baki, kach motzi et habaki. And just as the chazan discharges the obligation for people who are illiterate, who don't know how to read, they can't read the siddur, right? They don't know what's going on. So the chazan, we're going to do chazan v'tashatz. We're going to have the chazan is going to recite the Amidah a second time. Why? For all the people who don't know how to read, they couldn't recite it for themselves initially. And the ruling is, just as the chazan fulfills their obligation for people who don't know, he fulfills it also for people who do know. And since this person stands to pray, appointed by only one group. You have Shimon doesn't like him. Reuven is appointed. Everyone likes Reuven except for Shimon. Reuven and Shimon don't get along. Reuven's leading. Since he was appointed by everyone, but I'm sorry, he was appointed by only one group, but not by everyone. How can he fulfill their obligation when they do not assent to his prayer? They don't accept his prayer. A chazan requires everyone accepting his prayer. And if the majority accepts, but the minority do not, how can his prayers be accepted on their behalf? Even if he has them in mind, even if he has all the desirable traits, still he needs the congregation's acceptance. The language that the Maharil uses here is that the chazan is going to be motzi, is going to fulfill the obligation of the listeners. And if Reuven, is the leader, is going to not have Shimon in mind, is going to exclude him, then it's a problem for Shimon. Shimon can't have his prayers accepted. I don't know what this means, but he's not discharging his obligation because the Reuven has excluded him, because Reuven is discharging the obligation for him. He didn't, he's excluding him, so it's no good. Everyone understand this Maharil, this first explanation for what's going on here? Anyone have any questions about it, challenges, difficulties with it? Ralph, I think I wasn't sure if I saw you raise a hand, but maybe that wasn't a hand raise. Okay. All right, someone want to read for us the second Maharil, the second, he continues in this response. He gives another explanation. Source number 2, anyone preparing in the background?
I'm happy to go if you can hear me.
Thank you, David.
No problem. Know that when an Israelite sets aside a sacrifice and the Kohen comes to offer it, and the owner does not want this Kohen to offer it, would anyone think that the sacrifice is accepted? Behold, we find that they established watches over the daily sacrifices, since the Torah requires that the congregation of Israel offer the daily sacrifices. And how could it be that someone offers your sacrifice and you are not observing it? Therefore, the early prophets established 24 Israelite watches.
I'm going to pause you there for a second, David,
Sure.
just to give a little bit of a background. So that the Torah says that the daily offerings are on behalf of the whole community of Israel. The problem was these Nevi'im, the early sages, the early prophets, they're Nevi'im Rishonim, they were noting, how could it be that this sacrifice is on behalf of the Bnei Israel when Bnei Israel aren't standing there? So they said, okay, we're going to divide up basically the whole nation into these 24 different watches, 24 different categories. And then, they were going to have shifts. Everyone was going to have a shift to stand in the Beit HaMikdash, to be there when the Korban Tamid, when these sacrifices were offered. And their presence there would mean that the sacrifice was being done on their behalf. They had to be there. It couldn't be that I'm sitting at home, that everyone's sitting at home and the Kohen's off in Jerusalem offering the Korban. It doesn't work that way. That it can discharge for me. I'm sitting. No, someone of Bnei Israel has to be there. It's not just we can all sit at home. Someone from Bnei Israel has to be there. So there were these 24 different watches, 24 different groups. That was how they set it up. Okay, David, please continue. And thank you, Rabbi Strachler, for sharing that source sheet again. Okay, yeah, David, go ahead.
We see from here that even if they want it, still the sacrifice is not accepted unless they are standing there. And certainly, when the owner does not want it offered, they do not fulfill their obligation. You see that a Kohen only offers sacrifice with the permission of the owner. And here too, a chazan is not allowed to pray without the entire community's permission. I had a question on the previous source. I just didn't quick enough, which is there's been no Jewish organization in the history of the world that's had unanimity on anything. So the entire community's permission strikes me as a bar too high.
We're gonna get there. That's a good point. How do you actually pull this off in practice? We're gonna get there, because it's an unfortunate reality that this is a very, very high bar to clear. How could you ever have a chazan? How could you ever have any what unanimity is there? All right, very good. Thank you for that observation. Thank you for reading, David. So these are both the Maharil, right? He's said both of these, but there's a difference between the language that he's used in the first source and in the second source. Anyone pick up on the difference there in the language that he's using between the first source and the second source? This will become clearer maybe in the next sources when people start referring to what the Maharil said. But does anyone see a distinction there between source number 1 and source number 2? So in source number 1, he's speaking specifically about having an obligation that needs to be discharged. How can I discharge your obligation, right? If I hate you, if I want to exclude you, you can't be part of it because I'm not allowing you to discharge your obligation. It has to do with having obligation and then discharging that obligation. And the second source, the language that he's using is less to do with discharging an obligation, more to do with like representation. Like you have to represent me. And there may be a difference. If I don't like you, an elected official, I might not like my elected official, but my elected official is going to represent me regardless, right? That's sort of like how it works because they're an elected official. So it's not the same thing as about discharging an obligation. The second one is something a little more to do with, does this chazan represent the community? If it doesn't represent the community, then it's no good. Whereas the first one, it's like, as long as, even might not really represent them, but if everyone says, okay, you can fulfill the obligation for me, it's totally fine. So good, everyone good with that? That it's a subtle distinction that I think is going to be clearer in sources number 3 and sources number 4. Yeah, Noam?
Yeah, can I just ask, so in that first source, is that talking about a situation where the person doesn't daven himself, and therefore the shliach tzibur is taking on, is representing him essentially, like because he's davening for him? Or is it even like our current situation where everybody davens and then we have the shliach tzibur repeat it again?
So it's a good question. I think he's talking about even in the latter case, right? Because he points out this statement of Rabban Gamliel that the shaliach tzibur fulfills the obligation for everyone, whether you davened, whether you didn't, whether you know how to daven, whether you don't know how to daven. That shaliach tzibur ultimately is motzi et she'eno baki, kach motzi et baki, discharges the obligation for both. So it would impact both. But we're going to come back. It's a very precise observation that's going to be relevant, Noam. So thank you for raising that, because that's going to come up. It's going to be very relevant in a moment. Any other thoughts?
I have a question. Simcha
Please.
Mendelssohn. What about Birkat Kohanim? I don't like the Kohen. Can I exclude myself? What do we do here? How can I have a complete community agree on a chaz?
It's a good question. Okay, so that's a good, similar to I think what David was raising also. But that, like, how do you have that in practice?
How do you handle it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I don't know that I may have an answer. I'm not sure if I have an answer. Let's keep on going. You'll tell me if you think that you can discern and tease out an answer from what we're going to see. But it's a fair question. How does Birkat Kohanim play into this? It's actually really good. Okay. So Noam, I'm going to ask you to read source number. If you have the source sheet in front of you, I'm going to ask you to read source number 3, because I think he's going to address the very point that you had raised. Do you have the source sheet in front of you? I'll take that as a no, Noam. Okay, and someone else wanna read source number 3 who has the source sheet in front of them?
I can read it, Jeffrey.
Hi, sorry about that. I had to run away for 1 second. My daughter.
Give it to
okay.
Noam.
Okay, hold on. I got to pull the source sheet up. Okay, number 3.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot, Noam. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so source number 3. It's an ancient rule that a chazan may not be appointed without everyone's agreement, and even one person can withhold his appointment, for the prayers are in the place of sacrifices, and all of Israel has a share in the sacrifices. But I say that this was then, but in our generation, due to our great sins, everyone has arguments for no good reason. And if we needed to ask every single person, especially in large congregations, they would never find a chazan, even a singular expert in his generation. Still, someone would find a flaw in him, and shuls would, God forbid, be empty, as unfortunately happens. Therefore, it's good and right to choose someone based on the majority of those who pay taxes,
AKA people who pay dues, right? The dues pay membership. Right?
And even if there is a larger number who oppose them, we follow the majority for the sake of the community.
Right. Okay, so we do have an election. You have an election. You follow. How many people do we have? Okay, Okay, so we have 75% are supportive, even though there's 25%. It's no small thing. 25%. Still, we follow the majority because we have to. For the sake of the community, the language that he uses in the Hebrew is takanata kehilot. For the sake of the kehilot, for the sake of the congregations, we just have to go with this. And actually, I'm going to hold off the question I was about to ask until we read the Magen Avraham in source number 4, because you're going to see. I'll ask this question actually right now. Between the two answers of the Maharil had given about discharging obligation or representation, where do you think the Levush is standing here? Is the Levush thinking more about discharging obligation, or is the Levush thinking representation? How do people see this? You can just throw it out.
Representation?
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't use the words discharging obligation, really. He talks about place of sacrifices. We'd seen before sacrifices, you have to be there as to, sort of represent. It sounds a little bit more like the representation thing than it does the discharging obligation thing, which is, I think, in really strong contrast to the Magen Avraham in source number 4. Can someone read for us, short one, Magen Avraham in source number 4?
I will read it, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
You're welcome. It seems to me that this was in their days when the Chazan would discharge the obligation of the community. That was when an individual could protest, for one cannot become a messenger of someone against their will, as opposed to now when everyone knows the prayers and the Chazan is for the songs. And even though he recites Kaddish and Baruch Hu, there is no major concern.
Right. So here, the Magen Avraham, is he talking about representation? Or is he talking about discharging obligations?
Discharging obligation.
100%, Charles. Yeah, he's talking about discharging an obligation. He's saying, look, that was then, but nowadays, come on. And this is really related to what Noam was observing before. Like, come on, nowadays, what is the Chazan doing? The Chazan sings, like Kel Adon for everyone. Like what is the Chazan really doing? Okay, Baruch Hu, Kaddish. Okay, those are like real things. He doesn't really explain why in kol kach kapeda. We're not really so concerned about it. That's the way the Magen Avraham sort of addresses those things, those heavy duty things. But like even the Amida, I guess he would say what like we're just I don't know the tunes of Sharei Shemayim yet. But okay, so there are tunes. The Chazan leads the tunes. Everyone sings a lot. But like, what is the Chazan really doing nowadays? The Magen Avraham saying, okay, so there was a time that it was about the whole concern was discharging obligation. There was a concern, maybe the Chazan's not going to have me in mind. It's going to be a problem. But what's going to happen now? I'm davening myself. We're just singing. The Chazan's leading me in the song. If he doesn't want to include me, it's okay. I'm singing the song myself. Or if I don't sing it, it's just the song. It's not that big of a deal. So for the Magen Avraham, right? So he, in contrast, I think, to the Levush is saying like, look, we have a problem, but there's no functional way it has to be representation, but you're not going to get unanimity. So we just have to go with majority rules. That's going to count for representation. For the Magen Avraham, representation doesn't really, it's about discharging an obligation. And since the Chazan, what is the Chazan doing nowadays? Just singing songs. So we're totally fine. So the relationship between them doesn't matter. If I don't like the Chazan, doesn't like me, Chazan, storms up to the bima and starts leading. And okay, what's he doing? He's just singing the songs, and that's not gonna adversely impact my davening when he's just leading the tefillah like that.
Yeah,
Everyone good with this so far? Yeah, someone's asking a question.
If that's the case,
Yeah,
then it sure takes away from the sanctity of the process in terms of the direction you're going in.
what do you mean?
Well, if the Chazan is not representing whatever portion of the membership in the congregation, it takes away from what was originally intended. Because this whole process in itself is one step removed already from what was going on at the temple.
Right.
Okay. But
Right.
notwithstanding that, it further removes it if the Chazan is not representing the membership.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I never really thought about this, but the language that we use, right? Do we call them the Chazan? Do we call them the Shaliach Tzibur? Like, is there a when people refer to the leader as the Chazan versus the Shaliach Tzibur, are they unwittingly saying exactly that when they called someone, oh, he's the chazan? Do we also when we have a bar mitzvah boy lead as the chazan, like, are we saying like? Okay, so I think Shari Shemaim has its own chazan shaliach tzibur already. So I don't know if you have like a 13-year-old going up and leading, but what does it mean when you're in shul and you have musaf, right? This is in place of the korban. Like, this is a big deal, and you have like the 13-year-old kid going up to lead. I think what you're saying is sort of interesting. The 13-year-old that no one knows, who's like barely a bar mitzvah, maybe he's gonna lead. So we know for like Yom Kippur, we're not gonna have the bar mitzvah boy do ne'ilah, but I think you're touching on something that's really an important part of the fabric of what it means to be praying as a community. Like, how do we all do this together, and who's the person that we're putting up there? Side point entirely, but it just, what you're saying made me think of, I remember a tour guide when I was in high school, my senior trip in Israel. The tour guide said that sometimes he'll go to a shul and he will daven, essentially be a chidut with the kehillah, because he's like, I don't know these people. I don't know if I want my prayers to be bound up with them. Like, I don't know this chazan. Do I want it to represent me? I'm going to stand here because I want to be davening in a shul at the same time as other people, but I'm not going to consider myself part of the kehillah. It's sort of like I don't know. Your comment sort of made me think about the interplay and the relationship between all of these different pieces and how we come together. It's a good point. It's a good observation. I don't have a really good explanation for you or an answer for you. But I think it's a strong point. Thank you, Andrew. Any other thoughts or observations on this part about davening, about the shaliach tzibor / chazan, person leading, and whether the person can lead without the permission or without the okay of everyone of the kehillah, everyone of the community?
I have a little bit of a problem on the definition of Chazan. Chazan, Shaliach Tzibur, means he's gathering the community and he's voicing our intention to daven. That's Shaliach Tzibur, but in the whole Torah, we are accountable to Ribono Shel Olam individually. So a person who puts himself behind the Chazan, I think that he's not thinking that his tefillah is between him and Ribono Shel Olam. The Chazan is just assembling people together so the kahal can work together. But I'm having a problem with the shaliach being the person who delivers my belief or my prayer. And I'm trying to find out where that idea is in the explanation, from where we have that argument that the shaliach tzibur or the chazan is the one who represents the kahal. The word representation is very powerful.
Right.
And
right. I mean, I don't have any machzor with me right now, but like I'd want to look at the paragraph that the Chazan says on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur right before Musaf, the Hineni He'ani, right? Which I think reflects the Chazan's trepidation of the fact that, here I am as a representative of the community. I mean, that's definitely something that I think is an aspect of our liturgy, and we have ideas already. Fortunately, nowadays in 2021, we're all, thank God, literate, and we can open up any Siddur and we can follow along pretty well. But there was a time when that was not the case in the Jewish community, and so someone needed to recite the brachot that we could just say amen to them because we didn't have the ability to just open up a Siddur. So like that was a reality of the Jewish world in the not so distant past even. So we did have that, but I think you're right, and I think that I think that's reflected in how we daven now, right? We have the silent Amidah, which is between me and Hashem, and then we have the Chazarat Hashatz, which is between the Chazan that I'm saying amen to. I've got to say amen to. It's like a communal, collective thing. There's both of them happening. Yeah.
Thank you. Toda rabba.
I don't know if I gave any enlightenment about anything, but
you cleared it. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. So all this though,
Rabbi.
Yes, please.
Sorry, but are Are you suggesting, or are we reading here to be told to us that a chazan or a shaliach tzibur, if that person doesn't move you in their davening, then he hasn't fulfilled the obligation?
You're saying because the point that he uses is the rak hashatzu lepiyutim. You're saying just since the function of the shaliach tzibur is the piyutim, that if I'm not moved by the piyutim, then why is he even there? Is that your question, Charles? Like,
I think you said it very well. Yes.
That's interesting. I mean, we're going much more into like. I don't know, the word theology isn't the right word. We're going into like the thoughts of how prayer works and communal prayer. It's an interesting point. I wonder if you were to ask the Magen Avraham, what he would say about the Chazan who's there, but is not inspiring people. I remember the first time. I like to throw in like random little anecdotes a lot of times. The first time when I was here in Ann Arbor, I was asked to lead davening for the on the Yamim Noraim, and I had a little bit of a relationship with Chazan Sherwood Goffin, Zichrono Livracha, of Lincoln Square Synagogue in Manhattan. I had been an intern in Lincoln Square Synagogue in New York City, and I reached out to him and I said, like, I need something. Like I've always heard Yamim Noraim, but I've never done it myself. Like, can we talk about melodies, et cetera, et cetera? And I remember what really struck me is we had a long correspondence, but one of the things he said was the power that a shaliach tzibur has with the proper leading of the tefillot can be an amazing experience both for the leader and for the community. And I think sometimes when we pick someone who's going to daven, Shabbos Musaf 30 seconds before Shabbos Musaf, we lose that. But when you have a hired chazan who prepares for that chazanut, like that conveys something that position is serious. We care about it. It's not something. We don't have someone just come up right away and just lead. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Even the PU team. I think your observation is a fair one, and maybe I don't know. It's a good point. I don't know if I said anything of value there either, but I think if the whole thing is the PU team, it's a good point. All right. Any other thoughts before we move on? All right. So this was all as it pertains to tefillah. Question I want to pivot to now: what about Kriyat Torah? So we've established what the rule is, or we've established what this conversation, maybe there's been a change in the function of the chazan or the shaliach tzibur over time or in practice that maybe has shifted. What about Kriyat Torah? Right now, getting us closer to Shavuos and giving of the Torah. What's the story? Excuse me. What's the story with Kriyat Torah? Source number 5. Can someone read for us source number 5?
I'll take it.
Thank you, Rabbi Strackler.
Maybe the reasoning of Levush when he writes that a person cannot protest a chazan, and I did not see it inside, only what was quoted by the Aliyah Rabbah.
Just parenthetically, sort of interesting. Here he's admitting, I actually never saw the Levush inside. I never saw what the Levush actually wrote. I just saw him quoted, and we actually have what the Levush wrote in a couple sources up, and it's not quite the way he understood it, but still, it's sort of just some good honesty in the writing that he's saying, look, I think was a Levush, but I never actually saw what the Levush said inside. Okay, sorry, Rabbi Strackler, please continue.
Since everyone is an expert nowadays, there's no need for a chazan to fulfill one's obligation. And the blessings that a chazan alone recites, like Megillah and Shofar and the like, everyone can just say on their own, and to complete the bracha before the chazan and respond Amen. So the chazan cannot impact anything. Accordingly, when he reads the Megillah and the Torah and Shofar, a person can protest because through the hatred, he could cause him not to fulfill the mitzvah.
So he's saying if the issue is one of being, motzi someone's to be discharging someone's obligation. So when it comes to the brachot, like habrachot hanoagot shechazan levad mevarcham, the brachot that the chazan himself says only him, kamo de megillah v'de shofar de kavateh, yachol kol echad v'chad lomar be'atzmo habracha. It's not a big deal, because even if the chazan is going to say a bracha like lishmoa kol shofar, which is itself more of a bigger what the mitzvah is there with shofar, but it's going to make the bracha al mikra megillah. The worst thing that happens is that I just say the bracha on my own. So it's not a problem if he's saying, even if it's a bracha that he's going to discharge for me, we're all going to say amen to it. He's saying it's not a problem because I could just say the bracha on my own. I could say it, and then I can even say amen to the bracha after. I could say it quickly and then say amen and cover all the bases. But lefize koreha Megillah. But when you read the Megillah, v'chen beha Torah hakadosha, and reading the shofar, v'shofar atokea, and the person who's blowing the shofar, that could be a problem, because that I can't. He's going to read the Megillah for me. So I guess he's assuming we don't. And now, okay, nowadays we're affluent. Everyone can have their own Megillah and kosher Megillah in front of them. But it is who had a kosher? The Chazan had a kosher Megillah, so he's going to read it. So the bracha, okay, we can get around. But the reading of the text, the reading of the Megillah, reading of the Torah, the reading of the shofar, or the hearing of the shofar, that could be a real problem. And so he says that's where someone yachol achad le'akev alav. He could actually, withhold this and say, well, no, we got a problem here, because that could be impacted. My ability to fulfill my mitzvah of hearing the Torah reading could be impacted by this. Any thoughts on this?
Could you elaborate on that? Impacted in what way?
Well, if I read the Torah and I say,
No, let's go to can we go to the shofar, please?
Oh, so shofar, there's actually a lot of discussion, and I didn't prepare a lot into the world of shofar, but there's a big discussion as to what exactly the mitzvah to sound it, to blow it, the mitzvah to hear it. Shofar is a bit more complex that I did not prepare, so I don't feel comfortable talking much about how it impacts shofar, because again, it's a little more complex because it requires a discussion about lishmoa kol shofar. Is it litkoa? Like what exactly is the mitzvah related to shofar? So it may be a little more complex. A lot of people spill a lot of ink on that particular part of this comment because shofar is not as clear. The reality is that all of these are not as clear. Source number 6, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik is going to disagree entirely.
So let me help you out there a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, we had a member at Shir Shemaim by the name of David Brown, who, when he blew the shofar, the sound wasn't always right on, but the way he blew it came from the heart. And I could close my eyes and hear him blow the shofar. And to me, it had meaning. And I thought that sound went where it was supposed to go, if you follow me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he carried us with him.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that piece. That's a beautiful memory.
And some of the people here would know what I'm talking about.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So here, though, the Eshel Avraham is still, he's suggesting that when it comes to some aspects, okay, when it comes to some aspects, it could really be a problem. So in source number 6, Rav Salav, this is quoted in Nefesh Harav, Rav Hershel Schechter from Yeshiva University, collections of memories and of teachings of Rabbi Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik, Rav Soloveitchik. So he tells the following story, and I'll read it here, source number 6. He says, it once happened that a Torah reader said to a member of his community that he hates him, and then when he reads the Torah, right, he has in mind to discharge everyone's obligation but his. And this community member asked Rav Moshe Soloveitchik whether he needed to daven somewhere else. Right? He said, look, the Baal Korah just came up to me and said, I'm never going to have you in mind. So the guy says to Rav Soloveitchik, like, so what do I do? Do I have to leave the shul? And he answered, no. It's why? So explain. The Gemara in Megillah says that the 7 aliyot on Shabbat morning may go to women and children. And in the time of the Gemara, one who receives an aliyah also reads that aliyah. So you might have a 12-year-old, 10-year-old boy reading the Torah. Yet the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says that one who is not obligated a mitzvah cannot discharge others in that mitzvah. Accordingly, how could a minor read the Torah and discharge the public's obligation? Meaning, if you have a 10-year-old who's not obligated in mitzvot anymore, and the 10-year-old's going to be reading from the Torah, but then discharging my obligation, but how could that be? The 10-year-old's not obligated. How could the 10-year-old discharge my obligation by reading the Torah for me when he's a minor? He says, it seems from here that the framework of the Torah reader, of the Torah reader reading for the community is not as discharging the listener, as if each listener himself read from the Torah. It's not this idea called like shomea ka'oneh. I'm going to listen, and it's as if I read it myself. If it was that, they may have a problem because the minor doesn't have the capacity to do that. Rather, the essence of Torah reading is that the community listens to the Torah reader, and with this, the entire community joins in learning Torah publicly. And even if the reader has explicit intention to exclude someone, we do not care because in the end, everyone listened and learned. Intention only matters when one is acting to discharge someone else's requirement. So Rav Moshe Soloveitchik says, look, in the end of the day, the public Torah reading is not about discharging one's obligation. So even if the Baal Korah says, I hate you, I'm never going to have you in mind when I read the Torah, I want nothing to do with you in reading the Torah. If the guy in the community, person in the community, hears, listens, learns, that's what more could you want? He's fulfilled the obligation. So the relationship between the Torah reader and the listener it doesn't matter. And he continues with this, with the parable. I guess I'll say it outside. But Rav Soloveitchik says, imagine that you had, I'm teaching a class, and there's someone who I like in the class who is unfortunately not so bright, and someone who I don't like in the class who is fortunately very bright. And so I'm teaching, and the kid who I like a lot doesn't understand anything, but I really want him to learn, and I have intention that he fulfills the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and the one who is very bright, but I don't like, so I want him to not fulfill the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And Rav Soloveitchik says, what, you think just because I wanted this kid to learn, because I liked him, he now has this, he learned Torah, and this one who I didn't want, no, I teach the material. If the student learns the material, they've learned the material. And if they don't learn, they don't learn material. My intention doesn't matter. I can't control based on just my intention who learns. I'm putting it out there and they're going to learn or they're not going to learn. And so he says it's the same Torah reading, public Torah reading is that public learning of Torah. And it doesn't matter what I have. It doesn't matter what anyone has in mind. The bottom line is if I sit and I learn something and I learn Torah, that's all that matters. What we're trying to accomplish in the public Torah learning, public Torah reading, is that everyone that the publicly has gathered together, the Rabbim have gathered together to learn Torah together. And that's the point of public Torah. That's the point of Torah reading. No discharging. That's why we do it. Rabbi Strackler, how much time do I have? Are we ending at 9:45? Or do I have a little more?
It's short for 10. I think you can go a little bit longer.
Perfect. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. So to take it one step further, there's a little bit of a discussion. We make a bracha before learning Torah. We make up the same bracha before having an aliyah to the Torah. There's a big discussion, and certainly there's a discussion in the Masechet in the Talmud Bavli, right, in the Babylonian Talmud. There's a discussion about the origins of this bracha. There's also a discussion in the Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, about the origins of the bracha. That is to say, is this deoraita bracha? Is this something that we will say this mitzvah is commanded by God, and we say this bracha because it's a mitzvah deoraita, it's commanded by God to recite this bracha? Or is it a rabbinic commandment? The Torah doesn't say, God doesn't require us to make any bracha on this. There are very few, maybe, mitzvot that are brachot that we say that are actually biblical. It's just rabbinic. The rabbi said before learning Torah, we should make a bracha. And so there's a big discussion as to whether it's biblical, whether it's rabbinic. It's a lot of discussion, it's a big discussion. The Yerushalmi in source number 7, the Jerusalem Talmud, is very clear, is very explicit about the status of this bracha. I only took a little portion of it. It's part of a larger discussion about Birkat HaMazon, right, the blessing on food. which is definitely a biblical, and then Birkat Torah, the blessing for learning Torah. It's sort of having a joint discussion about the two of them, and that's where these two lines are coming from in the middle of that discussion. Someone read for us source number 7, which is this passage in the Yerushalmi, addressing the origins or the significance of Birkat Torah, blessings on the Torah.
I'll take a second turn if other folks are holding back.
Please, David. Thank you.
Rav Shmuel Bar Avdima said, that which the sages learned the requirements to recite Birkat Torah from the requirement to recite Birkat Hamazon, that only applies to the public readings of the Torah.
Meaning, I'm going to pause it there again, David.
Sure.
The rabbis had learned, just like there's a mitzvah to recite, the same verse that's used to prove that there's a mitzvah deoraita, as a biblical mitzvah to say Birkat Hamazon. That is the same verse that we use to establish, to prove that there is a mitzvah deoraita, it sounds, to read, to say a bracha before learning Torah. Keep on going, David.
And if that is the case,
I'm sorry, but he says, the Gemara says that is only when it comes to Rabbi, when it comes to public readings of the Torah. Let's keep going, David.
And if that is the case, then when one reads Torah privately, should one not recite a bracha?
What, if you're going to tell me that the only time we say a bracha on learning Torah is publicly, so then why am I saying a bracha when I'm reading privately, when I'm learning Torah privately? Finish it up.
Rabbi Abba Mari, brother of Rabbi Yossi, said they make it like all the mitzvot of the Torah, just like other mitzvot require a blessing before performance. Before performance, I assume they mean before
performing
it's performed.
Yeah.
So performing it, so too this requires a bracha.
So on a biblical level, when I read Torah, or I'll say when I learn Torah privately on my own, do I have a biblical or rabbinic obligation to say the bracha? When I woke up this morning and I said, the bracha of lasuk b'divrei Torah, biblical or rabbinic? According to the Yerushalmi here. When I learn it privately, that's like all the other brachot. The rabbi said, say a bracha when you shake a lulav, say a bracha when you count Sfirata Omer, it's a rabbinic. When I do it privately, it's rabbinic. The only time it's biblical, when do I have a mitzvah to recite a bracha? When I thank God for learning, for having received the Torah, that is only when I learn Torah, verabim. That's only when I learn Torah publicly, when I learn Torah with a large group of people.
Rabbi,
Yes.
was any of this gained from when there was an obligation at a certain time to read the Torah communally? There was
yes. Well, yes.
As specifically, because there's mention of that in terms of among the kings, and Rabbi Struckler, you may be able to elaborate and clarify on that as well.
Yeah. There are definitely a number of times. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut Rabbi Struckler off. If Rabbi Struckler wants to answer, but there are a number of times that are certainly biblical readings. But even in the rabbis established already ancient customs of reading during the weekdays and on Shabbat. It goes back a long time. But yes, there's definitely a history.
So when you're reciting the Torah on a communal basis, I can see why there would be a bracha. But when you're doing it in private, it's not so clear to me.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, and I think it's interesting though. And then source number 8, the Mishnah Yaakov story, he sort of like hammers this home. And he doesn't really add anything different from what we've already said from the Yerushalmi, but he basically just emphasizes this, that it's explicit, and he thinks this is certainly the case when we're reading Torah publicly. That Birkat HaTorah that we make publicly when before reading Torah on a Monday morning or on a Thursday morning, even that is a mitzvah. That's a bracha midoraita. And he explains something that's, it's a question that. Actually, in fact, it has probably come up more times, at least here in Ann Arbor now during COVID, when we have Torah reading. Whoever reads the Torah makes their own bracha. So someone comes in late to shul, is catching up with davening. They're the ones who are laning, so he's got to go up there to read Torah. He says his own bracha, lasok b'dvei Torah in Birkot HaShachar, and then immediately he goes up to read the Aliyah and he says the bracha again. It's sort of like you just said, Asher b'charbanu v'kol yamim v'lanu v'torato, like, why, you just said that bracha, why are you saying that bracha a second time? And the Mishkanot Yaakov here points out, well, that makes perfect sense. Every bracha the bracha that I said when I was learning Torah privately, that was only rabbinic in nature. When I come called up to the Torah, when I stand in front of everyone and I hold the Atzei Chaim and I make the bracha for public Torah reading, that's a mitzvah midoraita. And so obviously, whatever bracha I made that was only rabbinic because I was learning Torah privately, that's not relevant when I'm now learning Torah publicly, which is now I have a mitzvah midoraita to recite the bracha. Now I have a biblical obligation to recite a bracha here. And I think all of this is to get to the answer of our question, which is in the Kli Yakar in source number 10. Right? Our question had been, why is this Zman Matan Toratenu? Why is Shavuot, the day that the Torah was given, nowhere mentioned in the Torah? And I think the reason is because we see the significance and value. The time that we say a bracha on a Torah level, maybe there are only 2 times that we have a biblical obligation to recite a bracha. One of them is thanking God for food, and the other one, before we read Torah publicly on a Monday, on a Thursday, on a Shabbat, on a Chag. There's something really powerful about coming together and learning Torah communally on a regular basis. It's not unique to Shavuot, but we make this bracha midoraita, we make a biblical bracha, and when we come together publicly and learn Torah together, that's what Torah reading is about. It's about learning the Torah and having the Torah there. And that, in source number 10, is the Kli Yakar. Essentially, that's his answer. In source number 10, the Kli Yakar, he asks, he says, well, he doesn't ask the question right in these words here, but he says, like, all the Torah says is that on Shavuot, in source number 9, this is what the Torah says. It's a day, the day 50, Shavuot, is a hikravtem mincha chadasha l'Hashem. It's a day that you bring a new grain offering to the. That's all you have to say about Shavuot, the day of the giving of the Torah. It's a day when the new grain offering is given. And the Kli Yakar says, no, siman liyom matan Torah. That is an allusion to the giving of the day of giving of the Torah. The Torah needs to be new for a person every day, as if he received it today from Sinai. And that which the Torah does not state, that Shavuot is the day that the Torah was given, because God did not want to limit the giving of the Torah to a specific day. For a person needs to consider every day of the year as if that day he or she received the Torah from Sinai. Every day is like the day the Torah was given for those who spend their time studying it. So it is inappropriate to limit the Torah to being given on a specific day, right? When we come together to learn Torah publicly, that is a reality of our Sinai. When we sit and we learn Torah together on an early Tikkun Leil Shavuot, that is like a giving of Matan Torah. So every day is like the day the Torah was given. So it is inappropriate to limit it. Accordingly, the sages say that Torah should be new to us, not like something old that repulses us, for one truly finds something new in Torah every day. And so the day of the giving of the Torah is never recorded beyond this hint in the new offering of grain. Right? Shavuot is the day of the new offering. Every day is the new offering of this. Every day we have this new offering of the Torah, and that's what we have. So we're coming days away from the Chag HaShavuot, and Zman Matan Toratenu. It's a significant day. We want to stay. We're going to stay. I'm not sure what's going to be happening in Shari Shemaim in Ann Arbor. We're going to try to stay up. There's I don't know. It's Shacharit. Who knows what's going to happen? Like we're going to try to learn as much Torah as we can. But the message, I think, of the Kli Yakar, the message hiding behind Shavuot is that, yes, Shavuot is maybe calendrically is Zman Matan Toratenu, but the reality is that every day is Zman Matan Toratenu. Every day we have the opportunity to learn Torah. Every day we have the opportunity to grow, to find something new, to find something interesting. That's what's important. Okay, so we shouldn't make the mistake of saying let's pinning it all on tomorrow, next Sunday night, I think is Shavuot. But we have this opportunity of Zman Matan Toratenu every single day. Every time we read Torah publicly, the whole point is that we sit and we learn something new. The whole point, why we make the bracha midoraita, is because that's an opportunity to learn Torah, to learn the special Torah. And I give a bracha to all of us that certainly on Zman Matan Toratenu, certainly on Shavuot, we can really appreciate and receive the Torah on Shavuot, but that we can also remember that Zman Matan Toratenu is every day. Also, May 11th even if it's not Shavuot.
Rabbi,
Yes,
can I ask a question here?
please.
I don't follow why we learn to do Birkat Torah from Birkat Hamazon.
Yeah, so I didn't give the whole passage. The Gemara, both I think both in the Bavli, certainly the Bavli, I think also in the Yerushalmi, the Ki Shem Hashem Ekra Havu Gota Leleinu. When I call out Hashem's name, you should give greatness to God. They learn from that pasuk that when there's certain times that really that's really the biblical source, that the Torah says you should eat and be sated and then say a blessing. But the rabbis connect there, and so this idea of zimun, that if I'm going to bless God, everyone should bless God. We're all going to bless God together. They use that verse and link it there. I didn't give the full passage in the Yerushalmi over here. I apologize for that, Charles. I owe you a longer passage in the Yerushalmi. But there's a verse that they use, but I didn't give you that verse in its entirety. I didn't give it to you at all in source number 7. So I owe you.
In that first bracha, we don't honor God in the first bracha. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. I mean,
Right. Well, the Baruch Hu et Hashem Hamvorach, I think.
Oh, that's what you're referring to?
Yeah, I think that's the part that they were going off of. Sort of like how Birkat Hamazon has a Rabbatai Nevarech. There's like a call and response with the Zimun. There's also a call and response. I think that's what it's referring to. But I have to look. I have to do more. I have to do more.
Okay.
Hold me to it, Charles.
Wonderful. So thank you, Rabbi Anstandig, for a wonderful
Thank you so much,
shiur.
Rabbi Strackler. Thank you everyone for coming and for learning.
Absolutely. Tomorrow we're going to be hearing from David Fine from Israel at 7 p.m. and then we'll be having our women's learning program for Rosh Chodesh at 9 with Shana Kravitz. So please be sure to join us for the next part of our Shavuot, pre-Shavuot Tikkun. Thank you all for participating. Have a good night.
Laila Tov, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.